The Mississippi River, the main river of the United States, 3,730 kilometers from north to south. Its watershed covers 41% of the continental United States. Waters from 31 states and 2 Canadian provinces eventually end up in the Mississippi. Every second, it carries about 16,800 square meters of water into the Gulf of Mexico. This is more than all the rivers of Europe combined. Americans call it the Big Muddy. That's a fact. Every year, the river carries about 145 million tons of sediment. It literally builds the land. The Louisiana Delta only exists because the Mississippi has been depositing it there for thousands of years out of nothing. But the real Mississippi isn't the one you see from the shore. Beneath its surface are hundreds of sunken ships. Beneath its banks are cities that have sunk into the river. Today, we're going to unravel the main mysteries of the legendary river. Let's start with the history. Opposite modern-day St. Louis, on the eastern bank of the Mississippi, stands Monk Mountain, about 30 meters high. The base area is larger than that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. It's the largest man-made earthen structure in North America, and it was built entirely by hand, with no metal tools, no wheels, no draft animals. Only baskets full of dirt, carried generation after generation. Monk Mountain is the center of Cahokia. In the year of our Lord, it was the largest city north of Mexico. Population between 10,000 and 40,000 people. For comparison, London at the same time had only about 15,000 residents. Cahokia was bigger, and it stood on the banks of the Mississippi while England wasn't yet a great power. Around the main hill are another 120 smaller mounds. Wooden plazas with palisades, a wooden Stonehenge, a circular system of posts oriented to solar events. All of this spread across an area of about 16 square kilometers. This was a planned city with a center, districts, and public spaces. And then, around the 15th century, Cahokia completely emptied out. The reason is unknown. Climate changes, resource depletion. The residents cut down all the trees in the area and broke up the soil. Epidemic, social collapse. Versions exist, but none are fully confirmed. This is one of the biggest unsolved questions in American archaeology. What's most shocking is that when European explorers reached these parts in the 15th century, none of the local peoples ever spoke of Cahokia. No traditions, no legends, no memory. A city where tens of thousands of people lived disappeared so completely that even its name was lost. The Mississippi flows into the Gulf of Mexico, but it doesn't want to. More precisely, it wants to, but by a different path. In the lower course, in Louisiana, the Mississippi is pressing against the junction with the Atchafalaya River. From Atchafalaya, there's a shorter and straighter path to the sea, about 160 kilometers shorter than the current route. From a physics standpoint, the Mississippi should have already turned there long ago. Every year it makes an attempt. If the Mississippi changed its course, New Orleans would be on the bank of a secondary channel. The ports of Baton Rouge and New Orleans would lose access to the main shipping route. The region's economy would collapse. It would be a catastrophe for the entire country. Since 1963, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has contained a special hydraulic structure, the Old River Control Structure, which physically holds the Mississippi in its current channel. This is one of the most critically important infrastructure objects in the country and one of the least known to the general public. If it fails, the river will change forever. In 1973, during a record flood, the structure almost collapsed. For several days, engineers didn't know if they would hold the river. The soil was washed out from under one of the supports. The hole went several meters deep. They held on, but with great difficulty. In fact, one of the largest cities in the state, New Orleans, exists because a group of engineers holds the river on a leash every day. New Orleans is built below sea level. The central districts are 1.5 to 3 meters below sea level. Some neighborhoods are up to 6 meters below. The city is surrounded by a system of levees and pumping stations that work around the clock, literally pumping out the water that constantly seeps up from below. Without them, the city would have flooded in just a few days. But here's what few people know. The city is actively sinking, not because the water is rising from outside, but because the land beneath it is subsiding. 100 years ago, when groundwater was being extracted for the city's needs, the land began to slowly settle. Over the 20th century, the center of New Orleans dropped even lower, several additional meters. The city is sinking deeper and deeper, centimeter by centimeter, year after year. During construction work in the historic center, items from earlier eras are regularly found. Wooden structures from the 15th to the 10th century, fragments of brick bridges that once stood on the surface but are now several meters deep. Every layer of the city buries the previous one. What's under the foundations of old buildings in New Orleans, no one has fully explored. The city was built layer by layer on a marshy shore, and every layer buries the previous one. And yet, the city continues to sink at a rate of about 2 centimeters per year in some areas. That means that in 100 years, the surface level will be significantly lower. In the 19th century, the Mississippi was the country's main transportation artery. Cotton, grain, passengers, all of it was transported on steamboats. Thousands of ships every year, and thousands of them sank. According to various estimates, only from 1811 to 1900, more than 500 major shipwrecks occurred on the Mississippi. Boiler explosions. The boilers of that time worked under high pressure and often didn't hold up. Hits on sandbars, collisions in fog, fires on wooden ships that burned quickly. The river regularly claimed ships. It was so routine that newspapers printed lists of wrecks as a routine chronicle. Most of them just lie on the bottom under meters of silt that the river continuously deposits, some with cargo. In 1988, during dredging work in Kansas City, the steamboat Arabia was discovered, sunk in 1856. It lay under 15 meters of silt, not in the river channel but on land. For 130 years, the river had changed course. On board were found 200 tons of goods from 1856, canned food, clothing, tools, dishes. Everything preserved thanks to the anaerobic silt layer. Without oxygen, decomposition almost doesn't occur. Where exactly other ships lie, it's often unknown. The Mississippi constantly moves its banks, and ships that went down in one place in a few decades end up under new banks or even under dry land. Ships from the 10th century lie under fields and roads. The Mississippi Delta in Louisiana isn't a natural object, it's a construction project. For thousands of years, the Mississippi has been depositing, pushing land into the Gulf of Mexico. Louisiana is literally created by the river. A significant part of the state is river silt deposited for thousands of years upon thousands of years. Without the river, there would be sea. The land under your feet is compacted history of the river. But in the 20th century, something went wrong. Construction of levees along the entire length of the Mississippi intercepted the sediments that used to deposit the delta. At the same time, oil extraction in the delta led to ground subsidence, and the sea is advancing. Louisiana loses about 65 square kilometers of land per year. Every 38 to 45 minutes, an area the size of a soccer field disappears. Villages that stood on the shore several generations ago are now surrounded by water or have disappeared altogether. Islands where fishermen lived have become sandbars. The shoreline on 1930s maps doesn't match reality. Settlements that were inland are now on the shore. Under the waters of the Gulf are flooded neighborhoods, cemeteries, farmland. History gone underwater in one generation. In 1839, on the bank of the Mississippi in the state of Illinois, a city was begun to be built in Nauvoo. In 5 years, it became one of the largest cities in the state, with a population of about 12,000 people. It was comparable in size to Chicago at that time. Such a pace of growth had never been seen there in any city in the region. The church members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints built it, not just a settlement, but an ideal city. Straight streets, clear planning of districts. In the center is a huge temple made of limestone, visible from the other bank of the Mississippi and towering over the entire area. In 1846, the main group left for the entire country to Salt Lake City. They left quickly, taking only the necessary things. They left the temple, left the houses, left the infrastructure, workshops, mills, stores. A few years later, a group of French utopians, followers of the philosopher Etienne Cabet, tried to create a communal Icaria here. They believed that a perfect society could be embodied in a ready-made city, but they failed and left. Today in Nauvoo is a small town with a population of about 1,000 people. The temple, burned down in 1848, was restored in 2002 with an exact copy. The 19th century houses still stand. The layout is preserved. It's a ghost of a city that could have become one of the largest in the Midwest and didn't. Memphis, Tennessee, one of the main cities on the Mississippi. Jazz, barbecue, Graceland. But under the historic center of Memphis is a system of tunnels. Part of them are known tunnels from the 19th century for moving goods between warehouses and river docks, brick vaults spanning several blocks. Some are used as technical corridors. Some are abandoned and untouched for decades. In 2014, during the laying of new communications, builders found a tunnel that wasn't marked on any map. Dating suggests the end of the 10th century. Where exactly it leads, it wasn't investigated. The work continued. The tunnel was closed. The history of the city continued to be built on top of the history of the city. Under Memphis is one of the largest aquifers in the world, the Memphis Aquifer. It's at a depth of 100 to 300 meters. The water in it accumulated thousands of years ago and almost doesn't replenish. The city drinks water from a reservoir created before the arrival of man in this region. This is a resource that doesn't replenish, it's only consumed. It's this water, in the opinion of many, that makes Memphis barbecue what it is. Locals are convinced that the taste of the water is transferred to the food. Maybe they're right. In winter from 1811 to 1812 in the area of New Madrid on the banks of the Mississippi, a series of earthquakes occurred. These were the largest earthquakes in the history of eastern North America. According to various estimates, the magnitude of some shocks reached from 7.5 to 8.0. Three main shocks occurred from December 1811 to February 1812. At that time, few people lived in the region, otherwise the losses would have been enormous. The effects were incredible. The Mississippi literally flowed backwards. Underground tremors raised a section of the riverbed so high that the water went in the opposite direction. People on boats observed this. They were sailing downstream, and suddenly the current changed. Some thought they were going crazy. A new lake appeared in a few hours. A huge section of land collapsed, and water flooded it. Lake Reelfoot in Tennessee appeared, which still exists today. On the banks of the Mississippi, forests stood and fell. The land swayed like waves. Church bells rang by themselves in Boston thousands of kilometers away. The seismic event was so powerful that the entire eastern part of the continent felt it. The New Madrid seismic zone still exists today. Geologists warn that in the future, there may be another repeat. With modern population density and infrastructure, the consequences will be incomparably more serious. Under the famous Gateway Arch in St. Louis are several layers of history. The Gateway Arch, 192 meters high, was built in 1965 as a symbol of American expansion to the west. But to build the park around it in the 1940s, 40 blocks of old city development were demolished. One of the oldest historic districts of St. Louis, with 19th century buildings and cast iron facades. Unique architecture disappeared for the sake of a symbol of expansion. Under these buildings lay even earlier layers. The French colonial history of St. Louis, founded in 1764, was literally overlaid by the American demolition. A French city under an American city under a symbol of the American dream. A few kilometers from the arch across the river, Monk Mountain of Cahokia, the first truly large city on this shore, disappeared in the 14th century. The modern metropolis rose nearby in the 15th century. Two cities, one place, 1,000 years between them. The residents of the second didn't know about the first for exactly as long as they existed next to its hills. Monk Mountain stood among the fields, and no one understood what it was. The Mississippi divides the states. This is a problem. When state borders were established, many of them passed along the Mississippi Channel, a reasonable decision for the 1800s. The river was obvious, visible, constant. But the Mississippi moves, and situations arise when a piece of land is physically on one bank, but legally belongs to a state on the other, because the boundary is fixed to the old channel that no longer exists. The most famous case is the island on the banks of Arkansas and Mississippi. As a result of channel changes, the land turned out to be on one bank, but its jurisdiction was of another state. For decades, no state actually controlled this territory. Locals called it land without law. The Supreme Court considered such cases many times. There is a special doctrine. If the river changes its course gradually, the boundary moves with it. If abruptly, the boundary remains in the old place. Legally, this is called accretion, and the difference between slow and abrupt change determines who owns the land. This means that the state border between states is still a living, changing object.
Right now in Minneapolis, at the very beginning of the navigation section of the Mississippi, there is a waterfall. St. Anthony Falls, the only natural waterfall on the entire length of the Mississippi. When it was first seen by Europeans in 1680, it was about 15 meters high and was approximately 20 kilometers downstream from the current location because the waterfall was moving. The limestone under the waterfall gradually eroded by the water, and the crest retreated upstream, about 1 to 2 meters per year. In 200 years of observations, the waterfall moved almost 1.5 kilometers. This isn't a metaphor. This is a physically different place. In 1869, a tunnel under the falls used by mills collapsed, and the falls almost disappeared completely. The water found a new path underground and began to destroy the foundations. Panic seized the city. Mills that worked on the energy of the falls were the basis of Minneapolis's economy. Engineers saved the falls by reinforcing it with concrete.
Today, St. Anthony Falls no longer exists, but this is largely a man-made object. It is supported by concrete structures. Without them, it would continue to retreat or disappear completely. And here's the paradox. It's this waterfall that determined the location of Minneapolis. Not a political decision, not an inconvenient harbor, but a waterfall. Mills could be built here. Here was the energy of the water. The city was built around the waterfall. The waterfall kept retreating while the city was being built around it. The Mississippi creates land and takes it back. It moves its banks, moves state borders, refuses to flow where it's directed, and demands that engineers hold it on a leash every day. Under its water are cities and ships. On its banks are megacities that arose and disappeared. Next to it is a waterfall that kept retreating while the city grew around it. The Mississippi is older than anything humans have managed to build next to it, and it will outlast everything that man will build. Who knows what else we will learn about this river in the future? Someday we'll unravel all its secrets. For now, have a good day. Take care of yourselves. Thank you for staying in touch.